let's get Randy up here. He's the director of winemaking for Redwood Valley Cellars. He spent over 30 years honing and developing his winemaking craft and style. Each of our speakers bring a little bit something different to the table, and Randy has the practical experience to be able to paint a holistic picture of how winemaking can have many different approaches. Some of them are responsive, and then others are more proactive. So we're proud to introduce Randy and excited that he could make it. So please welcome Randy Meyer.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to everybody for attending today. It's certainly a pleasure to share some of my experiences with winemaking and some of the craziness that we've been going through the last few years, as certainly a few curveballs have come our way. I think a few things I'd like to mention today that probably are the most critical to me and some of my winemaking challenges. And obviously Tom will get to smoke taint later. And I've listened to Tom before, and it's very valuable on what he brings to the table with regarding to smoke taint. But what I thought would be curious and interesting to discuss is the future of Pinot Noir as it relates to climate change. Up here in Mendocino County, where I'm at now, after making wine for years and years in Sonoma County, we've certainly seen some degree of climate change effect, and certainly with Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir, of course, was, the hot variety years ago, planted. Everyone felt like they could absolutely, win with Pinot Noir almost everywhere. And as I've experienced up here making Pinot Noir for a little while, it is not at all what Russian River is, or Carneros, or other what I'll call kind of nice, cooler areas for Pinot Noir. We have cool nights up here, but we do have hotter and hotter days. And what I'm realizing with Pinot Noir is the varietal character now is somewhat reduced. It seems to be a little bit more generic. In wonderful microclimate locations, it still does well. And I'm excluding Anderson Valley, because that still is what I think also a holy grail for Pinot Noir. But in the Ukiah Valley, we're finding that Pinot Noir is almost being a little bit marginalized, just due with the excess heat we've experienced over the past, since that 1990 or so, as we start ramping up. And we're all trying to get Pinot Noir really ripe, right? Because that's the hot new way to make Pinot Noir. But what we're finding too is that up here, we tend to lose a little bit of that interesting varietal character that is prevalent in the cooler climates and even morning fog climates. Up here, for better or for worse, we do not get a lot of fog. And I feel like that's the variety that people will probably start either removing or figuring out better ways to farm it. It does seem to be the one that's the toughest up here and comes to mind when I discuss this climate change situation.
Randy, I want to ask you about the character of Pinot Noir and what you think. The Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir is just so much different than the Pinot Noir that you'd find in Russian River. And I'm wondering what you mean when you say a marginalized, or what kind of characters specifically are you talking about being impacted that you're seeing?
Well, I think a lot of us love that really deep black cherry that can come through in either Carneros, and to a certain extent, some of the really nice Russian River. I think what I see too is the pHs are lower in those areas, Carneros and Russian River. Up here, we're struggling a little bit with pH. And as we all know, pH can influence anthocyanin stability. So we end up having to kind of plow a bunch of tartaric acid into it to get it stable. And obviously being very aware of what this wine does while it's going through malolactic. Pinot Noir can be pretty frightening when you go through malolactic and the pH skyrockets, and it almost looks like you ruined it, but you really didn't. So I see that up here we get much more jammy, somewhat what I'll call sort of simpler characters, where I'm just, in a way starving for more of that varietal note that I was spoiled with Russian River and Carneros for so long. I mean, it's obviously very drinkable. It's a nice wine. Yet, if I'm looking to, point to varieties that are taking a little bit of a beating with this climate change, I point to Pinot Noir in these warmer climates.
Okay. That's interesting. And so I wonder, uh, what what are you doing currently to combat that? I mean, you can change
Well,
your picking strategy. We just talked about
yes,
canopy management.
and to Mark's talk earlier, we I kind of got my rear handed to me a little bit this year with one Pinot Noir vineyard that's right at the facility, and it got leaf pulled. It is a east west planting. Leaves were pulled. We had a couple pretty brutal heat spikes, in that right up until I can't remember the exact dates, but they were really hot. And that Pinot Noir that had some moderate leaf pulling, obviously, I think too much leaf pulling. Back to I think Mark's good points, and we're going to discuss that with our vineyard managers and in our area too. Is we've definitely got to protect that south facing side if we're east west, because this Pinot Noir vineyard just got cooked and it started to raisin up. I panicked, said, "Oh God, let's get this off." Brought it in, hoping that I'd see a little bit of a Brix rise, as you might expect with some, desiccated raisiny fruit. Well, this fruit wasn't really even ripe enough to let raisins give me the increase in Brix I was hoping for. So, make a long story short, the wine just ended up pretty simple. Didn't see the Brix rise I was hoping for, and it took a beating. And even though it was leaf pulled early, which I totally am a fan of that too, because kind of like my white Irish German skin, you pull too late and you get a big sunburn, you're just fried. I feel like grapevines are a little bit in the same way. They need that little bit of a early spring tan to toughen them up the heat. And up here we get our share of heat.
How many of your, we had a question from Nate earlier about head trained vines. Are you seeing, I know most of the plantings in California are VSP, and we've been doing that for a long time. Are you seeing any major differences in the trellises up there in Mendocino?
Yeah, I think Mendocino, it does have, we do have a fair bit of VSP, but I think some of the vineyards up here do have some age on them. And you'd be surprised how much, cross arm sprawl you'll see up here. It's not as much VSP as I like, because it is so clean and easy to farm. And there's not actually as much machine harvesting in Mendocino County as you see in Sonoma County. And I think the back to the conversation that Mark had talked about on machine pruning. I've got a good friend of mine that manages a vineyard in Alexander Valley, and they've gone to complete mechanical across the board. And I think that works really well with Cabernet and Bordeaux varieties. I'm not quite convinced it has a place for other more tender or even white varieties, because Cabernet loves that being spread out. The bunches are smaller. It really is well suited to that style of farming. But up here, we're still, there's a bit of sprawl out there, and even our own vineyards, sometimes we got to get in there and cut the wool back a little bit. And we're organically farmed up here too, which Mendocino County is a great location for organic farming because of the lack of fog that we have. We do get cool nights. We do get very hot days, and sometimes too hot, but that does enable us to avoid a lot of the difficulties that foggy, cool climates give. And it's just so tough to farm organically in Russian River or those kind of areas. We're up here, we're blessed with not much of the fog, which makes it so much easier.
One of the things that we do at LaFour is we try to innovate with products that are non-GMO and that will work with nature instead of against nature. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges for organically certified or the CCOF? What do you think are the biggest challenges for organic winemaking in response to the changing climate?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. And for me, this will be only my second year doing, making organic wines on a large scale. And what I have learned with this is it's very important to understand your nutrient status of the fruit. I think you want to be careful to avoid, a lot of problems with the fruit delivery, be it sunburn, be it other perhaps, weather related negative, fruit impact. And the most important thing I think I've learned with organic winemaking is prevention is absolutely critical. And the winemakers that are listening here today, we all know that it's pretty easy to come out of wine with a little copper sulfate or a little PVPP or some other, what I'll call just really effective winemaking crutches. With organic winemaking, that's not at your disposal. So what is so critical, and I've worked with Lindsay and the rest of the Lafort crew on choosing yeast strains that really are able to reduce H2S production, provide, handle low nutrient status. Because once you've produced H2S, specifically on organic wines, it is really hard to get it out. And we also have a line that's screw cap, and that leads to more challenges because if you have even a slight redox potential that is leaning toward the reduced side, you may not pick it up when you're bottling, but 6 months later under screw cap, and not necessarily even whites, it can be reds, you'll pick up minor H2S, and you might have been able to address that, with copper. But what we've also been doing here is using micro-ox and being very, very on top of what we feel is going on with the wine and to get it not so much into an oxidative state so it falls apart in the bottle, but get it so we're in a good balanced level and the wine can still be delicious under a screw cap. There's a few challenges.
I think as it gets warmer and warmer, Andy mentioned that, well, what can we do? Well, we can move, and I wonder if as it gets warmer in Napa and Sonoma, if we'll move more and more into Mendocino. If somebody was looking in Mendocino for really a new AVA or a new territory or the new frontier, where is that in Mendocino?
Well, I think what's happening in Mendocino is what you're going to see is people migrating to more benchland, minor altitude. It seems to me, at least, and in some of the readings I've been going over, is that a little altitude has been very helpful to keep pH down, you get that cooler nights, and it's a way to somewhat control the baking heat that we get down in the Ukiah Valley, in that what I'll call kind of bottom ground, river bottom area. What we're finding is that, even though going up in altitude could possibly mean the difficulty in planting and establishment, but if you can find a little bit of level ground and be up a little bit into the hills, I'm finding that is just some amazing fruit. It's just the flatland Ukiah is getting awfully hot. And another thing that I'll just segue to this year, and I've been doing this for a while. I think there'll be maybe like 37th crush, but the frost issue that we had this year has thrown me a curveball that I've probably never, ever had to deal with in my career. And I'd love to hear some feedback from other winemakers if they want to ask a question or two. But we really struggled with a frost event that was right in the prime of Cabernet getting ripe. And of course, with Cabernet nowadays, we want to let it hang. so we can get any of that, any of the greenness, any of the pyrazine out. And that has been successful. But instead, we just got pounded with some frost, and we ended up with the most odd rose taint, frost taint. Love to hear people's comments on that. So we've been, grabbing everyone we can for their opinions on how to address it. And we've certainly found and stumbled upon a few oak treatments that have worked. But my goodness, it is a character that is, extremely annoying because it just kills the varietal character and the color that may have existed. So that's another climate change issue I wanted to touch on, is unexpected frosts and just that craziness of, we say that things are getting warmer, right? And that's the general consensus, but we're also seeing these very unpredictable events that are just throwing us for curveballs that we're not used to dealing with.
Yeah, Greg mentioned the variability is hard. It's hard to predict variation, and a lot of experiments are designed just to eliminate variation. I know in Washington they had a frost event, and we heard a lot of winemakers came to us to talk about frost taint. I'd hate to put Tom Collins on the spot, and I know that his specialty is.
I'm willing to hear you, Tom. Good.
But Tom, did you guys get reports of the heavy frost up in Washington, and do you have any information on that?
Well, yeah, we certainly had issues with the early freeze this year. In fact, my smoke tainted trial wines from last year also have frost taint on top of the smoke. So a really nice combination. I will say that at least for the way we do our smoking, smoke taint still wins. But yeah, it was there were certainly areas that were affected last year. We had a trial looking at frost taint this past year, and there'll be more information on that coming out in the not too distant future. We're working on the manuscript for it right now.
Great.
Yeah, I can't say a whole lot, but we did spend some time looking at it this past year.
Wow, that'll be really exciting to hear about that. I'm looking forward to that. Is that going to be with ASCV, or is it in a different journal? Can you say?
I think we're going to AJV with that.
Okay, cool.
I'm definitely anxious to hear that, Tom. As down here in California, let's face it, we're pretty much spoiled in these coastal regions. And for the longest time, probably 2011 being excluded, we've been able to enjoy, just beautiful fruit quality and obviously probably even excessively large crops. I think this year, thankfully, Mother Nature might shrink it a little bit. But, the frost taint thing was, I think it does have a bit of an impact on some of this climate change. And up in Washington, I think you guys are more used to it. Down here, I tell you what, I had never tasted wines like that. And it was something that I think we can all probably want to up our skill set on as we move forward, because it may hit us a little more. And I would in some ways explain that in that we are getting our Bordeaux's so ripe now. For number one, there's to me a handful of reasons. We want to get them really ripe because we want to get rid of veg. And I think, things like Merlot up here in Mendocino County and a lot of Cabernets have really benefited from climate change. And it's odd to say that there might be an actual benefit or two here and there amongst all the negativity, but that reduction in the vegetative qualities of these Bordeaux varieties has, forced us to hang them longer. And by hanging them longer, we set ourselves up to get smacked this year. And then of course, we got all the fires, and I'm sure, Tom, you'll give us your knowledge again on that. And we've, I think, come a fair ways with smoke taint, but gosh darn it, and I heard you speak before on this, we think we got it and then we don't. We think we got it and then we don't. So, I mean, there are a lot of, winemaking misery around smoke taint, and honestly, I'm praying that we don't deal with this again, because it is just so difficult.